Okay, welcome. Now I switch to English for the next session we have. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce the next speaker, who is going to talk to us about the audience measurement to catch up with media consumption. Our speaker has great depth of experience in this field, and he probably knows everything about it. I like to welcome Mogens Storgard Jakobsen. He is Commercial Officer of AudienceProject. And Mogens, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Now, as the more alert of you would have noticed, I'm a kind of guest speaker because my colleague Henrik couldn't come today for private reasons. Now, I'm also one of the founders of the company and has been with our company for a long time. So while I'm not quite as well versed into the methodology and things as he is, I guess I have a broad overview to bring to bear anyway. So let's get at it. Although I will say that I'm grateful for those of you who come here that I can speak in English, because German would have been a bit difficult for me. I'm from the northern part of Denmark, and there we speak very, very badly German because we never saw German when we were kids on TV, whereas people from the southern part of Denmark speaks it fluently because they've been brought up watching German TV, kid TV. So I really apologize. I hope the translation mechanisms in place are working. So the contention we come with here is it's time for audience measurement to catch up with media consumption. But before I get into that, I'll just have a few slides about our company. And I can see now that the team that helped me produce this presentation have added a few rather salesy lines, I'd say. We're a pioneer and so forth. It's all positive words, but I think most of them are true. We are a company that are specialized in this field. We're a merger between, I'd say, market research, statistical competencies, as well as technology competencies. And we don't often see that, I think it's fair to say, in the industry as of today. And we work for various brands across our markets. We're not quite well known here in Germany, which is one of the reasons why I'm mentioning this. I think we're sort of a component in quite a lot of brands and agencies' measurement value chain, but we're sort of a little bit hidden below the hood. But I would say that many ad impressions here in Germany are also measured using our system. Now, what's the problem of audience measurement? Well, we have a small issue, which is that people tend to consume content across many more channels than ever. Of course, it's a banal insight, but it's nevertheless a profound one. If I just took some stats here, we run a survey every year, and you can see that in Germany, just because we're in Germany, so I mention it, on average, people tend to access the internet and consume content on an average of 8 devices. That's a little bit less than US, but still very, very significant. So obviously that creates its own set of challenges. Now, and again, so we have a real problem here, and I just wanted to highlight a few cases because what we do as a company is obviously to help in this regard here, to help brands and agencies deliver cross-media measurement. We also have another part of the business ones that helps publishers target their audiences, because from off of our panel, we can produce both targeting data as well as measurement data. It's in a way things that are using more or less the same technologies, at least in some instances. But nevertheless, I just wanted to give you an example about the issue, just to highlight the issue here. Now, I met with a client for a few days ago, a customer who have a target group 20 to 60 years of age. They still continue to run most of their ads via TV. And they agreed and understood that, of course, the reach is somewhat higher among elderly people and is somewhat lower among younger people, and so they kind of buy into that idea. I showed them the distribution of reach in a campaign, and you can see that for younger people, the distribution generated by linear is quite low, whereas the distribution generated among elderly people are quite high. And that's sort of, I'd say, very well known in the market, obviously. But if you then add another dimension, which is frequency, the number of times an ad is shown toward a specific person, we can also see very, very big differences. And if we take reach times frequency, it adds up to TAPs, which is in effect the campaign pressure or the way that you allocate your ad spend. And that's the insight that was very profound, actually, for that advertiser, even though you can say that if you're a professional in this industry, it may be somewhat banal. But the point is that that particular advertiser, having a target group 20 to 60 years of age, as a matter of fact, 65% or more of the budget, or 64%, sorry, but a very, very high proportion of the budget was actually being invested in adding, in showing ads toward eyeballs being 55 plus or elder. So that's a typical profile of a linear campaign. So again, it's just simply necessary to add more media channels. Another way, I'm just bringing another case here to show the situation here. That's another customer, a seller of a female beauty product, who runs advertising across various digital platforms. And the question she couldn't get an answer to was, okay, who actually sees my ads? Also, of course, what's actually my on-target percentage? That's also obviously something that can be quite difficult to understand if you don't apply audience measurement. But also a simple question such as, am I reaching 20% of females in my target group 10 times? Or am I reaching 80% of my target group 2 times? It's the same number of impressions, but just a very, very different allocation of your ad spend. And there's just simply no means available out there to generate that information at this point if you don't use cross-media measurement. Now, having established that it's an important problem, then comes the hard part, which is, why is it a hard problem? Because, of course, given that it's an important problem, why haven't it been solved? Or why are not more companies working on actually solving it? Well, it's just simply because it's difficult, to be honest. And I'd say that there are 2 classes of reasons why it's difficult. One is technology and legislation. We are in a landscape characterized by very profound and very fast technological changes as well as legal changes. And secondly, in the marketplace, there are also some quite profound tectonic changes going on that impacts the way that we do measurement and create some complexities for that. So let's go through these. Now, let's take a trip down through memory lane and remember how things were just a few years ago. And remember, we're at a digital conference. We're talking digital here. So a digital year is the same thing as a doc there. That's 7 years in most other industries. So back in the day, it was not for so long ago. At that point in time, everybody accessed the internet via a desktop and their web browser. The web browser was really the entryway to the internet. And whether it was Facebook, YouTube, whatever have you, news.com, the means of connecting ad impressions across various sites were cookies. We all knew that. And at that point, people hadn't even learned how to wipe their cookies. So that was swell in terms of measurement. And also there was nothing like privacy because we were back in the day. Then life started to get a little less simple, again, for not too long ago, because someone figured out that people wanted to have both desktop, smartphones, tablets, smart TVs. But still there was a time where even across these devices, with the exception of smart TVs, people tended to access the internet via a web browser. So Facebook and YouTube, etc., were still just essentially a website. So in order to do measurement at that point, of course, many ad servers and so forth still relied on cookies, but in our platform at that point in time, we used cookies, but we also used advanced statistics, I'd say, to generate human reach estimates and not sort of only cookie-derived estimates. So we're not done yet, because a little while ago, something else came up, which was native apps. So now we have smartphones, we have tablets, desktop smart TVs, and we also have web browsers and native apps. So you could access content via these 2 various main. If you think about this as a matrix, think of the complexity that arises here. At that point in time, also mobile identifiers were a thing that could be used to do measurement, to tie together reasonable statistics. So it was difficult but doable. But now, fast forward today, we still have this extremely complex landscape in terms of ways to access the internet, in terms of devices, but now we also have privacy legislation coming into play, ITP, intelligent tracking protection, making things difficult for a company trying to build meaningful measurement. We have TCF coming in, and when we talk about these privacy things, it's just something that is very important to take. I mean, you need to do, if you receive a line of non-consented traffic, for example, and if you're a serious platform, you need to wipe it of all PI information, but you still need to use it in your measurement. So it just creates all kinds of complicated questions. So that's number one reason why it's quite complex. Now, some other things have also been happening, which is that ad spend has tended to move in directions that makes it somewhat difficult to create these holistic estimates. Now, in this part of the presentation, I have actually quite a few slides in terms of ad spend, and I'm a little bit, I mean, it's maybe veering a little bit off script, but I still think the numbers are quite interesting, although maybe the tendency I'm going to show you is not as profound in Germany as it is in other countries. But I wanted to show you them anyway because it also ties into why this cross-media issue is something that needs to be dealt with. First and foremost, let me state the obvious, which is that ad spend moves toward digital media channels. It's super swell if you run a digital media channel, and there's nothing that indicates that that trend does not continue. In 2017, 40% of ad spend were digital. 2022, 64% were digital, and it just seems to keep growing and growing. Now, ad spend seems to concentrate. Of course, search taking up a large part. The big mothership of digital, Google, sucks up the majority of that. Meta, major player, and we see how things are consolidated around a few platforms. When it comes to digital open internet, around $100 billion. That's of course a lot, but still, it's nowhere near as much as just one of the big platforms. On TV, obviously, in terms of non-digital ad spend, TV is of course the biggest one. And now comes where it starts to have an impact on measurement, which is that it seems that walled garden ad spend is becoming a huge and more profound part of where the ad dollars go. These are international numbers. You can see in 2017, 25% of digital ad spend was sucked up by walled gardens. 2022, that was 50%. Now, I think that situation may be somewhat different here in Germany. You're smarter than that. But for the rest of us in smaller countries, having a poor, starved-out media, we're just laying there at the side of the road being run over by big tech. So I think maybe if we were to do the statistics here in Germany, you would come out better in the fight against American big tech. But seen from a global perspective, it's just very difficult to not be a walled garden. And also, again, supporting that fact, we see ad spend within walled gardens focusing on fewer and fewer walled gardens. Of course, Meta being the biggest one, Amazon really growing fast, Google, TikTok, Snapchat. So, and TikTok really growing. So people seem to be very willing to let the Chinese know what's going on. No offense taken. So, and when it comes to open programmatic ad spend, we also see things moving in the direction of consolidation. And let's not go so deep into this, but I just thought the numbers were interesting. So let's sum up. We got this situation where we got a $500 billion ad market, digital ad market, with, I'd say, in terms of audience measurement, rather little transparency. And it creates a number of issues. It's difficult for an advertiser to know what the waste is, the on-target percentage, which is, I know, a metric very often used in this country. But it's also difficult for a brand to know what's actually the reach being generated by a campaign. And that's, of course, maybe particularly interesting for video campaigns, but it's also interesting simply for digital in order to allocate your spend rather precisely. Now, third-party cookies are dying, part of the problem, although I'll say that this story about third-party cookies dying, the fact is that cookies has been losing relevance for a very long time. I think we all know that a frequency count or a unique count in an ad server has been a somewhat dubious number for quite some years. But nevertheless, that's what we've been operating with from an ad server perspective for quite a while. And also we have this horrible situation, maybe not so much in this country, but at least in quite a few other countries, we got this humongous creature called walled gardens that are really sort of eating the puppy, the open internet, in terms of ad spend. It's just so sad, but it's a reality. And it creates a lot of problems because walled gardens does not necessarily want to share data. So it's just difficult to create this holistic picture of what's going on. So enough of the problems. There are quite a few, but that's good because that's why there is a need for a business like ours. And so how to go about solving it? I'd say that we've sort of structured the way we go about this along 3 dimensions. Of course, there are lots of underlying things going on underneath. But one is that a platform doing cross-media measurement needs to have multi-platform support. That's, again, going back to the issue with walled gardens. And so within our strategy is a big focus on making integrations to these walled gardens, as well as also, of course, the leading open programmatic platforms, so that we can support measurement. And these things are very complex. If we take an example like Meta, where we for about 6 months ago released a new, I'd say, much improved integration, very, very deep. It's something that I think it took 3 to 4 years to establish that dialogue and to get it going. And both on our side and on the Facebook side, that was something that we spent a lot of resources on, and even just a thing like Facebook's audit. I think they had 6 or 7 Deloitte consultants auditing the system for several weeks on their dime. So in order to ensure that privacy were okay, because Facebook is a little bit dubious about privacy, so they don't want to run any risks. So the point is that across these platforms, it's just some very deep integrations that's necessary, and it also takes a rather flexible system. But that's what we at least has defined as rather important. Then it's also important to have methodologies in place to deduplicate across channels. Going back to remember the seller of a female beauty product I mentioned before. Am my ad reaching 80% of my target group 2 times, or is it reaching 10% of my target group 10 times, or 20% of my target group 10 times? Those kinds of questions cannot be answered unless you have reasonable ways of doing deduplication between channels. And finally, everything needs to be built into privacy-safe methodologies. We've defined as our company mission that we want to be the steward of our customers' interest in terms of privacy protection, in that if you work with us and measure with us, we need to be the ones taking care of that. It cannot just be a contract given on a piece of paper. It needs to be embedded in software. And that means, for example, that you can say that sometimes publishers does not implement the TCF signal framework correctly, and if we notice that, we blacklist that particular publisher's domain. So we make sure that we don't receive PI information and so forth. So the various checks built into that system, and it's just quite difficult or quite important to have that be part of that, because it also has methodological implications. Now, to sum up, the situation maybe being a little bit more technical across this fragmented landscape, being the internet. At this point, there's not really any universal identifier available anymore to tie together media consumption across channels. Due to privacy reasons and due to technical reasons, you can say that since we run a panel where people that join the panel consent to it and so forth, it's not that it's in and of itself an issue in regard to the panel measurement, but it's just sometimes not possible. And you can even have a publisher where part of the traffic is with an identifier and another part of the traffic is without an identifier due to the consent signals that we receive. And also, to the extent that there are identifiers available, we have it's necessary for us to work with various types of identifiers. So in a way, we have a situation as a measurement company which is rather unpleasant in that we, if you will, have multiple panels. I'm sure if you the first thing people ask about when you meet a measurement company is what's the size of the panel, But in a way, it's a somewhat redundant question, because you can say that we, in a way, have various panels that overlap each other, because some of the integrations we have takes a specific tailor-made consent flow for people to accept to be measured in that particular integration. And that's not necessarily something that is also available on other platforms and so forth. So in a way, you have multiple panels. So they're just things that are quite complex in this world. And so we work with different methodologies and panels in order to deduplicate. And in deduplicate, what's then the methodology? Because that's what people often ask. The issue here is that that's where Henrik should be here, because after all, I'm just a sales guy. But we use a system called virtual people, and the idea is that for any given population, you can create a virtual representation of that population. In Germany, you have a rather large one, more than 80 million. So we could create an 80 million population consisting of virtual people, if you will, identities. And if they're then 50% males and 50% females, we have a population of 40 million females, 40 million males. And then we can add more variables, and all of a sudden we have a hyper-complex matrix with all kinds of variables, of course, with demographics, but also with device type, geozones, all kinds of information that flies to us when we do measurement, even despite the fact that we don't necessarily have an identifier. If we measure something where we receive a log line of information, but no pi whatsoever, there still is information. We might know, for example, which geo area that piece of ad was shown in. We know what time of day and so forth. And based on that, we can build some statistical models where you allocate the impressions into these brackets and sum it up, and it becomes rather precise. And I wish it's something that I could brag of that my team has created, but they haven't. It's something that's built from off of some work that Google has done. And you can say a lot of things about Google, but they got smart people employed. And so our team has been very much inspired by that. I also believe that, I don't know if you're familiar with the Advertiser North Star initiative being set up by World Federation of Advertisers. That's also a concept that they've deployed. In a way, you can say our platform is a way to put into reality the ambition set forth by the World Federation of Advertisers North Star initiative. Now, to sum it up, the platform looks more or less like this, but not necessarily with all the medias here. The idea is that we're trying to build a platform where we integrate with more and more publishers and platforms. And some of those publishers, we also help feeding back panel information and using that for planning, if you will, or for targeting. So it all becomes sort of a loop where we use that information to simply optimize advertising. I've just added a publisher down there to say that, of course, large local publishers are also ones that often wants to be integrated in this, because, of course, seen from a buy-side perspective, it's quite interesting to have that information collected in one place. And again, going back here, so in the interest of not being too salesy, it's an ongoing process, right, with such a platform. So we're not fully integrated with all available walled gardens out there and so forth. That's a work in progress, but we have a backlog of integrations that is taking place. And also, any given integration might not be the optimal integration at any given point in time. It's a work in progress. I think already now with Facebook, I think we're on integration type number 3 or something like that. So what we do is we provide the best available estimate for any given key audience metric that a customer demands. And being a little bit more technical here, I showed you sort of the model with publishers, and here I show the underlying idea, or if you break it down into various types of data that feeds into the engine. We have media and receive information where there are only domain-specific identifiers, so they cannot be linked toward other identifiers. We have medias where it's publisher-specific identifiers. We're talking here about media that have their own login information. That's obviously also something that can be connected. And then we also have media where we simply have no IDs whatsoever. It can be medias that provide all their traffic with no IDs, or it can be because part of the traffic is non-consented, or if we detect that we need to strip that traffic from PI information, we do that. And then we have some what we call deep reach algorithms, because we needed a fancy word, but it's you can say machine learning to estimate the number of real people. I mean, think about, you have got like 500 million log lines of ad information, and you got no PI, but still there's lots of information in these log lines, and running a certain class of neural network algorithms over that will provide a very precise estimate as to what's actually the number of real people that saw these ads, which is another way of what's actually the frequency. And that we can train against other parts of our traffic where we have the information for sure via our panel. And we also have sometimes server-to-server deliveries that we then ingest. And it all sort of being mingled together by people smarter than me. And out comes certain audience metrics, which are interesting. And it's really very much a work in progress, as I said before, because, for instance, now we're all eagerly awaiting what's going on when Google changes, the flock concept. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Have you heard about it? It's a little bit delayed now, which is interesting. But we have people being in certain work groups set up of that. It's not that we sort of think that we have any influence in terms of what Google does, but it's nice to know what's going on and maybe also feed in an idea here and there. So that's a lot of talk about that. Now, just to show you here in closing, some real life cases, if you will. What's the kind of metrics coming out? This here is just quite simple, right? You can say that you got 3 different medias, and they all generate some reach, and what's then the combined reach in a given target group, and we can break down into unique persons. And if you have a budget, you can link that to the number of unique persons being reached, and all of a sudden you start to have the ability to do some meaningful calculations. And we often see that. Now, these are completely obfuscated numbers. Of course, in no way, shape, or form would YouTube ever perform well relative to open web. I'm not saying that, but it's just to obfuscate some numbers. But the point is that oftentimes people with our data and their own spent data, of course, can do some calculations in terms of where can they buy the optimal reach point, or the optimal on-target percentage, and so forth. And when I mention reach here, it's because I know that's probably for some of you the newest way of using these tools, because in Germany the on-target percentage is sort of the most widely used metric when it comes to audience measurement. But the reach part is also something that is widely used everywhere except Germany. So, summing up, questions answered, just typical ones. What's the net reach of my campaign? And it's actually quite interesting, because what's the net reach of my campaign? My contention to you would be a lot of the campaigns that you're involved in, you simply don't know. You don't know how many people in Germany a given campaign actually reaches if you run across various platforms. Of course, it all boils down to then, how did my target audience see my campaign? Which channel is the most effective, and all the other sort of operational metrics. And we believe that customers oftentimes receive some benefits out of that in terms of essentially making a bigger bang for the buck. And in a way, you can say that it's all an issue of what you put down in your funnel, right? When we talk about audience measurement, it's a metric that is usable when we're talking about meeting eyeballs, having for €1 million, and how do you then meet most eyeballs across your target group, so you drive high quality traffic down your tunnel. So ultimately people end up converting, whether that's on your web shop or whether that's in a physical shop. We also do have products related to consideration, brand lifts, and we have sales impact and so forth. but today we've been talking about audience measurement. So I hope I've been giving you a bit of inspiration, and now I have 7 seconds left, I can see. So I got to fill them out properly. I'll do that by saying thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much. I think if there's maybe one question, we could do that. Are you staying here for a bit longer?
Yes, of course.
Okay, perfect. So if there's any questions, Mogens will stay here and you can come and talk to him.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.